And thanks for sharing the evening here with me tonight. Really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have, and looking forward to trying to walk you through some of the process that CMSA has gone through in determining some of these new modifications for the U7s to U9s, so the little ones, and really try to help educate, to help have a conversation, and to just reinforce the why behind some of these modifications. There's a varied response in the registration in terms of what clubs have passed on and the information, and what some levels of understanding are. So I'm looking forward to tonight. If you have questions, feel free to chuck them into the chat box. I will find the chat box eventually here. There we go. And yeah, we should be good to go. So just wanted to outline a few conversation objectives for tonight. And really it's to identify the process that we've gone through in making these modifications, identify what those modifications actually are, the why behind these modifications, and then also just supporting your child through this and in their return to soccer. So there'll be a brief little piece of that at the end. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So I'm Jordan Stewart. I'm the current CMSA Technical Leader. I was brought on in January of this year after doing a bit of contract work for CMSA. And honestly, it's been a real privilege. I've had a lot of challenges, but I've had a lot of fun in trying to tackle those challenges so far. I've coached players from U8 to university level. I'm currently a CSA A license holder, which is the top coaching designation in the performance stream in Canada. And I'm the former ASA regional coach and Rex director here for Alberta. My portfolio when working for ASA was around player development, was around supporting districts in outreach activities, so grassroots development, and then also in coach education as well. And you'll see little bits and pieces of that background come through with my role into CMSA now. I've worked in every environment that there is to work in Canada. I've worked in the club system. I've worked in pro academies. I've worked for PSOs like Alberta Soccer. I've worked in the youth national team development system, college and university, and then community outreach as well, which was a real privilege working in Edmonton with free footy. So I've seen the game from all angles. I've got a pretty good pulse, I feel, on what's happening within the game, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you tonight. So first off, what was the process that we actually went through? So I'm just admitting a couple of people here, a few stragglers. There we go. Sorry about that. Right. So process was around this. Is I tried to take a somewhat scientific process. And if there's any scientists in the room tonight, you'll say, well, that's not very scientific, but this is about as scientific to me as it gets. So I looked at what we actually did within Calgary within the game. So I examined it. Is our current league structure, is our district long-term player development focused? And is it ready for the club licensing that's coming down from Canada Soccer? I then found some gaps, went through some research, tailored things a little bit, and we're now kind of at that implement stage. So part of that examination was around what are we actually doing? So as you see with these graphs, this is a quick visual of the number of players at each age group over the last few years. And so what we see is we see this dramatic growth at the U7 to U9 age group. But the reason for that is that clubs are now declaring any in-house, what was formerly known as community or house league players to CMSA. So massive increase. But you can see a decrease at every single other age group. And that's a massive concern. So we're not actually doing a great job with the systems, with the processes, with the structures that we have in place, both at a district level and at a club level, of keeping kids in the game, which is somewhat concerning. I then thought, well, surely we must be developing loads of elite players all of these competitive 7-year-olds and ultra elite 13-year-olds. We have to be. So I looked at it from a national perspective. And this data is about 10 years old. So this is without any CPL in place. But at that time, we only had 150 professional players. And I believe at that time, the vast majority were men. So what we do an excellent job of is we do an excellent job of registering kids in soccer. We give them opportunity to play the game. But as you can see there, we're actually the worst country out of all G20 nations in the world at developing elite professional level soccer players. So if anyone's now bought a plane ticket to go to Costa Rica and think, hey, I'm moving my son down there because there's a way better chance, I can't say I blame you at this point. But what I can say is I think that there's hope in the future, and I think that there's a good system in place or going to be in place for these kids. And the research backs this up. This isn't just me with some quick little sample size. This is a quote from a study that was done in Ontario when they were implementing the Ontario Player Development League. And the realities are changes are occurring in the system because there's a concern that the current structures and programs do not facilitate either providing sport for all or developing elite athletes. So we know that something has to be tweaked. So we're at this point now in the journey in terms of implementing. And what I've done is I've consulted with all of the local leaders in Calgary. So we've had a few rounds of feedback where I've presented ideas to them. They've given me feedback. I've gone back, modified it, tweaked, changed. I really think that we're at a great place now to implement some positive change and positive modifications within the game. And that's where this key piece from the U7s to U9 is. Because at the end of the day, Einstein said it best, insanity is just doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So if we continue down this path of competitive structures at young age groups, win at all cost mentality, but we're expecting players to stay in the game or expecting players to be developed, well, we're crazy. And it's as simple as that in my mind. So the question in my mind came up, why would you change something that's not broken, so to speak? And I think that the little comic on the side, if you can see that, is pretty poignant, and it's pretty accurate right now. Just something around who wants change. Everyone wants change. We know change is a constant in our lives. But when you ask who wants to change, and you ask this of the clubs, you ask this of coaches, you ask this of parents, you ask this of Alberta soccer, you ask this of Canada soccer, I think the hands go down then. And then lastly, who wants to lead the change? Well, I think I'm the one standing there with my hand up saying, well, I guess it's me. Not that I'm the chosen one, but I think that's the way it's going to have to be. Someone is going to have to lead the change. So I'm stepping up and I'm going to do that. And I have this question. I want you to think about this for about 30 seconds. So if you had a blank canvas right now, you could blow up the whole system. You could redesign it and the environment that we live in Calgary right now in the soccer scene. Would you redesign it to its exact current state? So I want you to think about that for 20, 30 seconds. It's maybe a yes answer. It's maybe a no answer. If it's a no answer, then we know that something needs to be tweaked, needs to be changed. So I hope you've identified that something's maybe a little broken. Something's not operating at optimum capacity. And I loved some of these images. I had to throw them in. It was like smoking on airplanes. That was once completely acceptable. And now I think you get thrown off. You get the parachute and you get two-footed in the back and you say, good luck. Coca-Cola used to be marketed as a intellectual beverage that would cure headaches, hysteria, melancholy. We know that Coca-Cola doesn't really do that. And if anyone's taken a road trip with a really fussy 11-month-old like I have, you know that you'd rather have them sleeping on their little bed in the back seat than chained up in their car seat. Kids have car seats now. They have to be protected when we drive. So things change. But I want to get a little more clear on what change is and what I'm actually speaking to. So on the left-hand side of this image, that's just changing up the shape. But on the right-hand side, I see that as improvement. And there's a great quote by Ferdinand Porsche where he says, change is easy, improvement is actually the hard part. And I think this little video that I'm about to show you will show both change and improvement within a system. So I'll give this a go. Hopefully we get some play. There we go. No, I've actually sped up this video. I think it was 4 or 6 times. So they don't actually move that quick, but for the sake of time, I've tried to speed it up for us. Now, I did the quick 3.03 seconds. My math or my stopwatch could be a little bit off, but that blows my mind. And I always smile when I see that last part of the video, because the efficiency, the consistency, the role clarity within every single member of that team is phenomenal. And they've improved and changed the entire system of how they do that. So I wanted to really make this clear that we got down to the why. Like, why are we actually modifying things? Why are we changing things? We didn't just say, we're going to change this and hope for this result. And at the core of the why, and using this model from Simon Sinek and his golden circle model from his book, Start With Why, we drilled down into this, that at the core of everything that we do at CMSA with the clubs has to be focused around the mental, social, and emotional corner of player development. So most of us have either heard of the 4-corner development model. I prefer to look at it like this, and this is adapted from Dan Abraham. And we need to be reinforcing things like social relationships with teammates and coaches, because they're going to play a vital role in teaching young athletes to strive and to stay active. And from there, motivation, confidence, self-esteem is born, and that leads to technical, tactical, and physical outcomes, which then all lead to participating in the game, progressing through it, and performing in the game. And I think wrapped within this is a culture that within Calgary we need to acknowledge that we all live in and that we all exist in within the game. And so this culture looks something like this. I took a stab at modifying another diagram from Larson and his paper, Successful Talent Development in Soccer, and what the characteristics of the environment are. And from this, all I can draw is that it's incredibly complex, that the decisions of one affect the other, that there's so many pieces that are intertwined in this ecosystem that we can't be negligent in how we act and how that affects everything else. And at the center of it all is the person, the player. And we need to make sure that we're doing what's absolutely best for them. And so that's where we've gone. So I want to launch a poll, right? So on your screen, you're going to get a poll. Okay, I'm going to launch it right now. So you should on your screen have options, and you can work through them and choose. And at the end, you should have a submit button that you hit. So how do you think that your club that you belong to right now selects or tiers players? What's their main criteria? And you can only choose one. Unfortunately, I'm giving you the option to choose loads of them. So I'm curious. I'll give you another, I'm going to say 20 seconds to get the votes in. And I know that there's 62 people on this call now, and only 27 of you have voted. So those that are hanging out, just watching Dancing with the Stars or something in the background, now is your time to contribute a bit and to give some feedback here. Awesome. There's 47 out of 62. Another 15 seconds or so. Okay, I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. Not bad. 53 of 62. And I'm going to share these results with you. So this is fantastic. I love this. Some clubs, some places are doing it via friendships, motivation, and interest. Some just say the big ones go to tier 3 or the big ones go to tier 1. Some of them are strength. I don't know if they do a push-up test and that determines where you get tiered, or a sit-up test. Who knows? There's a willingness to learn and coachability. I would love to see how clubs are evaluating that. Please, if your club's doing that, let me know and I'll reach out to them. And the other ones are just goals scored. If you're a good goal scorer, you go play in tier 1. Simple as that. But the vast majority, is around skill and ability. So skill and ability right now. So 53% of you said that. And I'm not that surprised, to be honest, because oddly enough, you line up perfectly with what the data says as well. The Canada Soccer did a long-term player development survey, and they found that 50% of coaches, either at U9 or slightly above, said skill was how they selected players. Subjective and perceived skill. Granted, they might have a juggling competition, they might have a dribbling competition and timed, who knows? There might be some criteria around that. But current skill determines where kids are placed and what tier they're placed. The problem with this is that all of the research around talent ID, talent development, talent selection shows absolutely no correlation between skill or performance at ages 9 to 12, and then how it translates into elite level performance. So I ask a lot of questions, and one of the questions I asked as soon as I started CMSA was, why do we continue with this method of selection? Why do we continue doing things the way that we're doing? Because the traditional model of choosing a select number of players based on performance at a specified time, then putting them into a team, making them compete against other teams, is flawed in these ways. One, it doesn't accurately predict potential or future performance. It often turns away players who might have a high potential, but are just inexperienced at that moment relative to their peers. So you can imagine a kid who plays their first year at U9 compared to the kid who plays their 6th year at U9. The one kid is 1 year old, the other kid is 6, but who knows where they shake out. So there's something around motivation, how that impacts the player. Something around early selection prior to physical maturation or puberty implies the early exclusion of the majority, and it discourages players who might become as good or better if you just give them time and a chance. And really, the characteristics that define talented athletes in an early age are not the same characteristics that define elite athletes later in their career. Kids are not mini adults. And we have a model, or we had a model, that said kids are mini adults. We put them in a league. We make you drive all over the city and compete against other 7-year-olds. Because this is what we expect. I think as parents, as adults, I think that we expect some sort of linearity, some sort of straight line from A to B, a constant progression, and really a defined beginning and a defined end, whatever that actually is. But the realities is that it actually looks a little more like this. That we live in a non-linear development environment. and that there's specific ways to coach in terms of nonlinear pedagogy or nonlinear teaching that have best practices associated with these kinds of environments. We know that kids go forward, backwards, sideways, up, down, left, right throughout their playing careers. And we know that, hopefully, all going well, there's no defined endpoint. They continue to be involved in the game, like me, like maybe some of you, as either parents of people in the game, of referees, of administrators, as club coaches, some association with the game. And really, you can see that they're not the same. They're so different that it's absolutely critical that we acknowledge those differences and how these decisions impact the player. So I'm going to launch another poll here. Okay. And I want you to think about, with this kind of information in mind, what is the primary reason or most important reason why you registered your kid in soccer to begin with? I'm curious. So you can scroll through them. Is it so that they become a pro? Do you want them to get a university scholarship out of it? And that's the core reason why you did it. Is it to encourage physical activity, give opportunities to learn life lessons through sport, make some new friends? Maybe they nagged you like crazy and you couldn't say no, you had to register them. You could be like me and have played soccer your whole life and you want your kids to follow in your path. Not saying that I want them to follow in my path, but I've been involved in the game since I was about 2.5. It's just good cardio for their other primary sport, or you just want them to learn some new soccer skills. So I'm going to leave this open for another 15, 20 seconds and allow you to have your voice heard. So 48 out of 62, there must be a good dancer on. I've got a message already from someone. I love that. It's fantastic. I'll definitely be getting into that. So thank you. It's around motivation and players. So good. I'm going to stop there. Looks like that's dried up. I'm going to share the results. So no one's done it, so they become pro. And there's a piece of me that's really happy because, as you can see, the deck is stacked against them, so to speak. There's one of us that says, I really want them to achieve a university scholarship. That's why I involve them in sport. Fair enough. But if I look at those two responses in the middle, just to encourage lifelong physical fitness and health and to give opportunities to learn life lessons through sport, that essentially has really nothing to do with technical, tactical outcomes, a little bit with physical, but it all centers around that social, emotional, and mental corner that we're trying to give these kids something greater than just team A plays team B, and team A beats team B by 8, and team B never wants to register again. So if these are the core reasons why you registered them, how do we as an organization, and how do your clubs as organizations really embody these principles and put those at the core of what we're doing every single day? I'm going to stop sharing that and I'll continue on. So through this, positive youth experiences and outcomes through sport, we all know this. We know that they get bigger, stronger, faster, their lungs develop, their cardiovascular system develops. We know that there's some psychological and emotional development in terms of dealing with setbacks, facing challenges. We know that there's social development, teamwork, getting on with others, learning how to problem solve as a group. And we know that there's intellectual development because there's studies that show that academic performance that follows athletic events actually shows a greater academic outcome than previously. So your brain actually becomes better. You're able to think clearer. And really, the factors that contribute to these positive pieces are around program design. So what the clubs are doing within their programs to foster these these outcomes and experiences, and really how we as adults influence our children and kids through parents, through coaches, through admins, through all of these people, through the private academy trainers that charge an arm and a leg, right? These are all factors that either give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down as a kid. So our role is pivotal, absolutely pivotal, because the features, oh, my apologies. 1 second. There is a couple of people in the waiting room. Apologies, I hit the wrong button. There we go. The features of these positive development settings are around physical and psychological safety. So can a child come and express themselves in the environment? Because if you don't do that correctly, sport programs are incredibly intimidating and frightening. I remember being in Grand Prairie one time and I couldn't get my head wrapped around it at the time. I was still new in the Alberta soccer job, but I couldn't get it wrapped around why this 4-year-old stood at the door of an indoor soccer field where we had probably 85 kids running around playing and broke down in tears. That wasn't a safe environment for him psychologically, and that was way too much. No problem. We found solutions around it and we introduced it slowly. There's also something around the appropriate structure, and there has to be clear, consistent, age-appropriate outcomes in these developmental settings with the appropriate adult supervision in the form of qualified coaches. That's why we ask coaches to do the age and stage appropriate coaching course, Respect in Sport. We ask them to complete Making Ethical Decisions because we want unbelievable role models for these kids. There has to be supportive relationships and opportunities to belong because these are pieces that are key to lifelong activity. And a couple more features of these developmental settings. The positive social norms are all around how society should operate. And maybe not in the typical masculine, aggressive, competitive, gladiator model of sport, where one team must lose, one team must win. They have to compete. They have to learn how to win, lose, tie, draw, get blown out, win by lots. These are kids we're talking about. Support for efficacy and mattering really just comes down to it must be child-centered, promote some empowerment and autonomy, and opportunities to experience challenge so that you can develop those skills of grit, of resilience, of problem solving. And you have to have some skill building that occurs through developmentally appropriate program design and coaching. Because at the end of the day, you've probably signed your kid up as well to get better at soccer. I mean, that's what I would pay for if I signed them up for soccer. I don't want them getting better at basketball, sign them up for soccer. And lastly, integrating family, school, and community makes for the optimal environment. And I want you to remember this piece as we go on, that the reason, one of the core pillars of why we've moved into this model is that we feel it's going to integrate family and community efforts to the best that we can. And then we'll look to incorporate school as well. Because these are the realities. I hear all the time, well, we need the competitive kids playing with the competitive kids. But when I look at that image on the left, those children are competing. The one that's in socks, the one that's in jeans, looks like a very informal pickup structure of game. And I can promise you that they're competing with each other. You can't tell me that the child in the red shirt is not trying to steal the ball from that other child. They're competing. But children typically compete. And what happens is adults then compare. So children compete, adults compare. And I'm a firm believer that comparison is the thief of joy. That when we start to compare our kid against another one, that it sucks out all of the joy from our experience as adults. It sucks out their joy because I think they can sense that. And what we've done is we far too often, and I get this from club technical staff as well, that they say competition is the cornerstone of development. Competition is the piece that matters. It's the only thing that develops a player. And we often, in the past, have seen competition as that role as master. But when we do that, it doesn't actually serve the athlete in their long-term development. And I think that this quote by Johan Cruyff sums it up best. If you want to talk about a competitive environment, you can imagine what a club like Ajax would be like. We spent 4 hours a week there. We played 4 hours a day on the street. Like, where do you think he really learned how to play football? I don't think it was in Ajax and in that world-renowned academy, right? So where are they actually learning? And part of this is that success leaves clues, right? So if we start to look at best practice from around the world and what some of the top players in the world's developmental journeys have been, it boils down to some common themes. So this is Erling Haaland, who's recently been valued at about 180 million euros. So if you've got a men's team here in Calgary and you can scrape together 180 million, he is yours. But if we look at his development and his journey, he actually played for his home club, which is a little tiny village in Norway. You can Google this as we talk. This is not a booming metropolis of Oslo or anything. He stayed there till he was 16 years old. And everyone thinks, oh, I've got to move them here, move them there. No, he just stayed there. In his environment, he had access to indoor and outdoor facilities that he could just go pop in and play. And football or soccer was conceived as a social environment for learning, not as a competitive junction to earn a pro contract. He was a 2000 born, but he played up in age level. And at age 9, he had 1 training session a week. 1. At age 15, players were given the choice. And I underline that because I believe that's key, to either train 4 times a week or 2 times a week. They could either really pursue football or they could, play it recreationally. It was their choice, not the coaches, not the parents. Players' choice. And that his training group actually consisted of 40 players. So they were able to keep players involved in the game. My suspicion is because it was based around social relationships. And I love the fact that it was a mixed gender environment. They actually had a girl in there. And the last 2 points really sum it up for me. Not one player retired before the age of 16. And if we dial all the way back to the beginning of the presentation with numbers dropping in CMSA like crazy, what if we reimagined how we actually organize these groups? What if we reimagined how we deliver competition? Because this speaks to me that they did a great job of keeping the masses, but then they also developed 5 national team players and 10 pros from this group. There was a research paper published around this group of players as well. And if anyone would like it, please reach out. My contact info will be at the end. Another quick case study is Jordan Heidemann. So she's born in Chilliwack, BC, which is, again, not a booming metropolis. She played and trained in a boys' team locally in Chilliwack when she was growing up. She then went to a tournament, got scouted or seen by a club, Surrey United, which is in the suburbs of Vancouver, and quickly from Surrey United was put into the BC Rex program. So she was still living in Chilliwack, driving an hour and a half each way. So 3-hour commute, you can only imagine what that would be like with a teenage daughter trying to scarf down some subway and do homework on the way home to Chilliwack. She was later billeted in Vancouver, and she left the BC Rex program 6 months early to sign a pro contract with PSG. Deanne Rose. Deanne Rose is very interesting, to me anyway. She grew up playing in a small club in Bradford, Ontario, which before I had heard of this, I had no idea where Bradford, Ontario actually was. There's a local community club, and she stayed there until she went full-time into the Ontario Rex program. As you can see, you can work through the points on your own, but that Rex program for a time actually got shut down, and she had to go back into her local club environment in Bradford, Ontario. And while playing for the senior women's team, her club coach called the Rex director, who was Joey Lombardi at the time, and he got off his backside. He went out to the game and he watched her score 4 goals in the match, and immediately picked up the phone to Bev Priestman, who at the time was the U17 head coach, who's now our full women's head coach, and said, I think I've got one. 2 weeks later, she was in a U17 camp. And as you can see, 2 weeks on from that, she was in a full women's national team camp. There's been a lot written about this young man in the middle, Alphonso Davies, UN ambassador, UN global ambassador. He's born in 2000 in a refugee camp in Ghana, and his family immigrated to Canada. He played for his local club with his peers, social relationship based again in Edmonton. And after he was identified through a free footy program, which is essentially an after-school program that was put on organized by a gentleman named Tim Adams, St. Nick's Soccer Academy saw him there and brought him into their school and their little soccer academy. He played for a couple of clubs in Edmonton that were just based around playing with his friends. Identified by FC Edmonton and the Whitecaps, and he actually went on 3 trials to Vancouver before he was deemed ready to relocate. And by deemed ready, I mean socially, emotionally, mentally ready. He had all the tools in his toolbox, physically, technically, tactically, to move, but he wasn't ready as a person to actually leave home. And as you know, he was sold to Bayern Munich. He was in the 2020 FIFA Pro Men's World 11 and is a phenomenal success story. And lastly is Kadesha Buchanan. Again, grew up playing in a small local club in Ontario, Brams United. You can Google this one as well, because I can imagine 95% of us probably never heard of it. There's a regional training program in Ontario at the time, and she was never really selected for the provincial team initially. She played as a center forward, and if anyone's watched the women's national team or watched Lyon right now, she's a center back. So she's a stalwart. She's an absolute beast at the back. She came back a year later, and the rest is history. She made her women's national team debut at 17, and she signed professionally. She's a 3-time Canadian Player of the Year, which is unbelievable when you think about who she competes with. Some lesser-known woman named Christine Sinclair, I think is her name. All of these, past, present, future, have got one common thread to me. And that's that they embody the principle of living local and playing local, of having social relationships drive their activity in the game. So, all right, I'm going to park the why piece there for a second. I'm going to give you 2 to 5 seconds to just mentally reset, and then we can get into the what. So if I was to summarize all of that up, it's around prioritizing social relationships. It's around ensuring that there's a developmentally appropriate environment, which really means it's fun, it's safe, and it's enjoyable. And then I want to hop into the what. So what's actually changing? So we're going to move to a quadrant-based festival-style match day. And oftentimes when people hear the word festival, they get this image in their mind of a petting zoo and bouncy castles and I don't know, all sorts of other gobbledygook. But really what the word festival means in this case is that players will play in small-sided games, 3v3 and 4v4. They'll rotate after a set number of times. So they'll play multiple different opponents on the day. You're not going to have to drive 40 minutes across the city at rush hour to get there for a game against another group of 7 or 8-year-olds. We're coming to you. We're bringing the game to you so that we operate under principles at CMSA of accessibility, of inclusion, of enjoyment, and of being child-centric. Great. So there'll be match day hubs, is what we're calling them, in each quadrant of the city. And the clubs are about to find out which hub that they'll be going to. And it's based on where you live. So we're not going to have you driving crazy amounts. We want to bring the game so local that it's a maximum of 20-minute drive. But I want to go even further than that in the years coming and hopefully have a 10 to 15-minute maximum drive for every single match in Calgary for a family. I want to go back, just zoom back for 1 sec. Open rosters. Open rosters is a concept that allows players or kids to be moved from one group to another. And I'm deliberately not saying the word team, because team implies they're all packaged together, all 12 of them. They stay together. There's their coach. That's what they do. They hang out together. They play games together. They win together. They lose together. And what I'm saying is that they'll be in groups. So these groups are able to either move around on the day so that they find a meaningful competitive match. And when I say meaningful competitive match, I mean they are put with kids that are like them. Okay? So they are put with kids that are like them on the day. And what I've encouraged from the clubs is that they start to group these players initially around social relationships, because they have to develop a social relationship and a tie in order to stick with the game, in order to produce successful players, in order to really, really develop a love for the game. It's about getting on with your pals as well. And then I want to move into this. The 3v3 and 4v4 matches, we'll cover a bit more into there, but playing time is incredibly important to youth sport participation. So if we put this group of 12 that we had initially, we split them up into maybe 2 groups of 6, and we play a 4v4 game, that means there's only 2 subs on each one of those groups. We're maximizing the amount of time that these kids play. Because the last time I checked, you pay for kids to play soccer. So you might as well get what you pay for. We also are trying to foster a sense of community and connection, and that goes back to those factors of positive environments, that we're bringing people together. And I know that we're talking about this in a COVID environment right now, that we're told to stay apart, we're told to distance, we don't want to be close to anyone. And we've got plans for that if we need to pivot into some sort of COVID model. But I'm thinking from a utopian view. You can call me a crazy optimist, that's fine. But we've got 7 different plans in place into how we can actually execute this and execute this model even in this environment. So there's a couple of quotes that you can read, and the ones that stick out to me are: the competitive nature of sport can undermine a sense of community, especially in youth sport leagues. It's vital that a sense of community, that social relationship, I'm going to keep harping on this, is put at the core of what we do, because seriousness, competitiveness is the thief of playfulness. So we heard comparison is the thief of joy. Seriousness is the thief of playfulness. And me, I played up until the time that I moved down to Calgary, when I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, coaching the Rex girls for a 6 a.m. session. I played because I loved it. I played because it was fun. I played because I was with my friends, not because I was trying to win some silly piece of metal on a ribbon at the end of the year. That's what it ended up for me. So when you registered, we asked you to outline some concerns, or what you've been told, how you're feeling. And one of them that was resounding was, why in the world would you make these modifications during a COVID-19 pandemic? During a global pandemic, why change anything? Let's have the safe security blanket. We'll go back. It'll be kosher. It'll be really, really comfortable. And what the pandemic has allowed us to do is give us an opportunity to evaluate current soccer environment and technical pathway, so where your kids are going. It gave CMSA a chance to align with what Canada Soccer is doing and Alberta Soccer is doing. And most importantly are the last 2 points. We actually got a chance to read some research around what are best practices in youth sport development, in soccer development, in environment development, in league structure. We got a chance to actually research. And now we get to implement progressive and innovative strategies based solely around enjoyment, staying in the game, and then progressing through the game. And really, these strategies are first in the country. So we've had a lot of talks with Canada Soccer and how we're going to do this. And I want to say first as a district, because Nova Scotia Soccer launched something like this about 2 years ago, and they've had tremendous feedback. There was a lot of bumps along the road in terms of implementing and parent buy-in and such, But if you've got friends that have got kids in the game in Nova Scotia, please reach out to them, ask them what it's like. So we've taken some learnings there and are implementing here to be the first in the country to be doing this as a league-wide initiative. More concerns. These modifications are a waste of time for talented players. Like, where is the actual value in doing this and basing your groups around social relationships, have friends play together? Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But how do competitive U9 players get better? And my response is simple, that all players will actually flourish in these game formats. This is what best practice is. You can look at Belgium, you can look at Norway, you can look at Iceland, you can look at all of these different countries that do this. You can even look at examples like Bayern Munich doing away with all of their groups U10 and below, because they know that grouping 9-year-olds together because they're the best doesn't turn out into anything. It doesn't transpire into professional players. And that's what their goal is. And I also think that the language that we use fuels the culture that we live in, and that competitive and talented are not words to use when we're describing children. You can substitute those hardworking, great listener, ahead of their peers. Those are some words that we might be able to use to then start to change the culture internally. And really, for me, all players have this opportunity, which is the little diagram at the bottom. It's increased time on the ball, leads to increased decisions that they have to make, which leads to increased love of the game. They're actually playing the game, they're making decisions, they're having a few mistakes, they're having some success. And that over time leads to improved development and improved retention. Another concern is the impact that these modifications will have on players. So we're actually going to give children an age and stage appropriate playing environment to allow expression, creativity, and development to flourish. A first, borderline first in the country to do that. We're also allowing clubs to be flexible in how they develop the players and encouraging them to put the needs of each child first, rather than team performance, rather than the team needs. So I had a lot of feedback as well around, well, the U9s were going to play X format, 7v7. We're really looking forward to that. So there was a study done by the FA over in England. And it's really the Manchester United 4v4 pilot scheme. And what they did is they evaluated 4v4 against 8v8 for a match format. So there, you've got a quick little bit of how they actually were evaluating which format was better. You know, is there individual possession? Pardon me. Are they trying new skills without fear, ridicule, or reclamation, basically being yelled at? Can they take on players and challenge defenders? And is there little or no pressure from significant others? Apologies for the typo. And so what they did is they did a quantitative and a qualitative analysis. So they counted qualitative, straight numbers, the number of passes, scoring attempts, goals, 1v1s, and dribbling skills, little tricks that the kids pulled off. And then they surveyed all of the participants on their perceptions of it afterwards as well. And here's what they counted. So in the game formats on the left-hand column there, they did a few different match formats, which is what we're looking to do as well. What they did is they counted all of those things along the dark blue top row. Number of passes was the highest in the 2-goal game. One goal, away they play, right? No goalkeepers. Line ball was you would pass or dribble over a line in order to score. Goalkeeper, obviously there's a goalkeeper in each goal, and they play. 4-goal game, you defend 2 goals and you attack 2 goals. Good. And then the 8v8 format. If I'm a parent looking at this, I'm going, wait a minute. So they get less scoring attempts, they complete less passes, there's less goals, there's less 1v1 encounters, and there's less dribbling skills at 8v8. why in the world would I want my kid to play 8v8? There's actually less development for them in that format. And this sums it up. If we think about what puts the biggest smile on someone's face when they're playing the game, generally it's scoring a goal, right? I was never very good at it. So for me, it was kicking someone and winning the ball back. That's what it was for me, but not everyone is like me. You had way more scoring attempts. You had way more chances to go 1v1 and try something in terms of a dribbling trick. So when we think about what fuels intrinsic motivation, when we think about what fuels confidence, it's quite obvious that 4v4 could be the right way forward, at least at these young age groups, right? And then qualitatively, there was 80% positive comments in the survey from club directors, coaches, administrators. Parents actually kind of liked it at 68% positive comments, and the players seemed to like it as well. Below here are the top positive comments from players. So they actually saw that the 4v4 was more enjoyable than 8v8, probably for them and for their children, that there was less emphasis on winning, and that 4v4 is going to improve the technique more. But I love this. The top negative comments from parents were that the 4v4 games seemed less competitive. There's not a standing, there's no wins, losses. The kids and teams don't move up and down. But from the people that understood actual player development and the experts that you could say in terms of club directors and coaches, that was the lowest ranked negative comment. So they had no concerns about that. So it doesn't matter. And the last one was around players didn't understand it. I believe when they did this study, they had all the match formats going at once. So I could see that players would have some difficulty understanding what each format is. So the concerns, more concerns over the modifications that we're doing, that breaking up teams is going to have a detrimental effect on kids. And I want to be really clear with this. What we're doing is we're not breaking up teams with these modifications. We're saying, play with your friends. We're encouraging clubs to say, group them based on who they're friends with. We're saying, keep them in groups. Keep the group of 12 together when you train. If you can, expand that group to 50. We're saying, train them as a massive group rather than, here's a group of 12, here's a volunteer coach, on you go, we'll see you in 6 months, have a good time. We're trying to change that mindset. And then at the end of the day, soccer is an individual game played in a team environment. All my time working in a pro club academy, working with provincial teams, working in national teams, I've not once seen an entire team progress through the stages, progress through the pathway. Not once. Not once. And I've yet to find research that says that as well. What I have done is I've found research that forming groups of players for matches based on mixed ability will actually raise the standard of all players and reduce achievement gaps. So if we say, we're going to go back to the old model and just let all the good kids, talented kids, competitive kids play against each other, forget the rest. We don't know them anything. They don't know us anything. But the reality is, without them, you don't exist in 5 years. There isn't actually a player pool that you'll have to play against as a player, as a parent. So now you've got a choice of, well, there's 3 teams left. Which one do I go to? Well, I don't like that coach. That coach yells. I guess I'm stuck here. So if we don't tend to the masses, we don't actually have anything at the end of the day later on through the leagues and through the pathway. So good. I'm going to move on to another concern. And please feel free to send a message through the chat anytime. I've tried to be monitoring it a little bit and respond where I can. I feel like I've already touched on this. There's absolutely no evidence that shows competition is the key factor in development. But the question that I think we need to ask is, when do kids actually need to learn how to win and lose? So is that around 13? Is that at 17? When are they mentally, socially, emotionally ready to deal with that? I'm not too sure. Not too sure yet. But there's some suggestions through research that show stage 4 in training to train. And if you want the long-term player development documents, I can send them to anyone who wishes. U11 to U15 for the girls, I guess they develop mentally, socially, emotionally a little quicker than us males do. And U12 to U16 for the males is when learning to win and lose actually could become part of that mental corner of development. So why would we encourage that from U7 to U9, from U7 to U10, from U7 to U11? Again, if we keep doing the same thing that we're doing, it's insanity. Good. I'm going to have another quick sip and just speak about how can we all work together in supporting your kids' return to sport? Because it will come. I know that this COVID thing is wreaking havoc, but it will come. There will be light at the end of the tunnel. And this is a big, massive, wordy quote, right? So if your objective is to turn them into champions, the odds are is that you're wasting your money and time and your child's happiness. Sports are metaphorically, so sports are littered, if you will, with the scarred psyches of children whose parents tried and failed to do what Earl Woods, who's Tiger Woods' dad, and Richard Williams, Serena and Venus Williams, succeeded at doing, which is turn them into ultra elite, best in the world performers. Your goals as parents have to be for your children to have fun, learn life skills, succeed later in life, and to value health and fitness and develop a love of sport. That was the core reason why 90% of you said you actually enrolled your kid in soccer. It wasn't so the competitive kids play with the competitive kids. And listen, if by some freak chance you give them world-class athletic genes, they love the sport enough to work unbelievably hard, and they get the right kind of support from you, and they become professional or Olympic athletes, hey, job well done. That's icing on the cake. That's a cherry on top, if you will. So with that in mind, I feel like the process is so important, and that we have to have patience with this process. We have to be measuring results over the span of 2 months and 2 years rather than the 2-hour match day and comparing them over 2 hours. We need to compare these kids against past versions of themselves, not team against team, not my child against their teammates, just against past versions of themselves. Because if we can start to shift that mentality, we can realize that this is actually a kid's game and it's not an adult sport. It's a bit of a play on words there, but there's some truth to it. And the last bit that I would give you is set some SMART goals with your child. I think that this layoff has been really hard on kids. I think that it's posed some significant challenges. I think that some kids are rediscovering their self-worth, who they are, their identity, because they don't have sport, which is a key part of most of their identities, especially later on. So SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And you can look that up on Google and some forms and tables to help guide you through that process. But I think it's important that you set some goals with your child so that their expectations aren't sky high, so that we can manage those and temper those as we get back going. And I also think that positivity won't hurt, right? Having a smile. Parents, coaches, clubs, CMSA, we all have one thing in common, one common thread through us, and that's that we all want what's best for your child. We want to see them enjoy the game. We want to see them active with their friends. We want to see them play in a safe environment. It's key for us. Key. And I think everyone can agree at all levels that that's key. And so like I said, I think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know if it's a train, right? I don't think it's a train. I'm fairly convinced it's not a train, but a man with new ideas is a madman until his ideas triumph. That's a quote from Marcelo Bielsa, who's the current Leeds manager, a world-renowned coach who's influenced both the game and many other coaches. And I'm not saying that I'm unbelievably smart. I'm not saying that I'm the chosen one, but what I am saying is that I think based on best practice research based on experience. I think, I'm quite sure that this is the positive step forward. So I leave this image all the time at the end of presentations with clubs, with parents. I think that as a culture, as a community, we pull in all sorts of different directions and live on the left-hand side of this image. We think that this is a great direction. We think that it's going to pay off in the long run. It's probably at the cost of someone else. But what I'm asking, pleading, and encouraging is that, can we transition into the right-hand side of this image and just pull the game in a similar direction? Doesn't need to be the same, but a similar direction. So on that, I have done nothing but talk for about an hour. For those who would like more information, for those who would like to connect, for those who would like to share anything that they'd like to share, please reach out via the following methods. I don't typically engage in anything heated on Twitter, but if you want to give it a follow, please feel free. But that's my contact information where you can reach me at. I'm going to move into some of the chat here and some of the questions or comments as well. There's a couple people who have sent in thank yous. You shouldn't be thanking me. If anything, I need to thank you for investing the time into understanding this, investing the time into encouraging your kids to play this beautiful game that can give them a ton, I promise, gives you loads if you put yourself into it. And thank you for investing in yourself, because ultimately without you, without your kids, we don't have a game. And so sincerely, thank you all for joining tonight. I'll stick around here for a little while for the questions and such. I'm going to get into one of them, and sorry if it looks like I'm looking past you. It's just on my other screen here. There's a comment here from someone that says the kids need to play more games throughout the summer. So it's interesting, actually. When we took the number of minutes that these kids would have played in the old traditional model, I'll call it, and then we compared it against the minutes that they're actually going to play in this new format, they actually play more minutes. You're getting more for your dollar. The clubs are getting more for their dollar. So we've actually expanded what we're offering and the field time. And listen, they'll play anywhere between 4 and 8 games within this format each time. So we're talking about potentially having anywhere between 24 and 48 different opponents, plus more game time. So don't worry, they're playing more games. They will play more. I love that. And they will develop if they stick with it, right? And if we prioritize social relationships at the core. I'm going to read this one. What about practices where some kids are more experienced than others, i.e. a player who has never played before and is playing for the first time and is in a practice with a player who has played indoor and outdoor since U4? It's a very large skill gap that will be difficult to coach drills that are skill appropriate. Love this question. I'd like to share a story with you around this from my time at the Edge School of Athletes, or School for Athletes, pardon me, private school located on the west of the city out in Springbank. So there's 3 groups at Edge. There's a junior, an intermediate, and a senior group for the soccer program there. Within every single one of those programs, you would have anywhere between 6 and 10 or 11 players. Of those 6 to 10 or 11, I could guarantee you a minimum of 2 of them in the group of 6 were dancers, swimmers, hockey players, basketball players, or some other multi-sport athlete that had never kicked a ball before in their life. And out of those 6, 2, 3, 4, somewhere around that range, were soccer players, were footballers. That's what their identity was. That's what they did. That was their primary sport. Now, the skill in coaching is having activities that actually bring out individual development principles. It's not around training a group to play well. It's about organizing your activity to meet the needs of the individual, to actually encourage that individual to get better from minute 1 to minute 60, say, of your session. And coaches need to start thinking that way. There's nothing to do with team performance. It has everything to do with individual development. And my son's 11 months old right now. When or if he chooses to play soccer, to play sport, the one question that I'll ask clubs is, how are you making my son better? And if the answer is, well, we're going to go to provincials in this tournament, that's no. How are you going to make him better? And I'm not just talking about kicking a ball. How are you going to make him a better person by being in your program than he would have been if he was not in this program? How are you going to do it? Show me the how. Don't give me lip service. Show me the how. Show me the plan. And so I'll go back to the Edge example. There was a group of players there. One boy came from a Dutch professional academy who at the time was arguably the best player in Alberta, potentially in Western Canada for his age group. He was in a training group with a girl who was a competitive dancer. He was in a training group with a girl who was a competitive swimmer. Kids compete, adults compare, and good coaches will find ways to individualize the environment. I'm not saying that I'm the best coach, but what I'm saying is I found ways to develop all of those kids in that environment. Now, unfortunately, he doesn't play anymore. He's lost the love for the game, and I think that was due to playing too much, almost, to being pushed like crazy by parents, by expectations from club coaches, probably expectations from myself. Right? We've actually ruined a player by doing that. So
what about the shy kids though? Like, what about the kid who goes to a practice and is scared to be there, and now you're saying they're going to show up and they're going to be in a group of 50 of kids they may or may not know? Like, I'm having a hard time understanding the model.
Yeah, excellent, great question. There is no name associated with that, or not on my screen anyway. But within the club training environment, there's standards coming down from Canada Soccer with the licensing that encourage a group of players to be trained together. So if you're at a club that is a national youth club license holder, their skill center programming is exactly that. Their skill center programming is additional training that is offered based on interest, based on motivation, just based on if they want to have more, not based on how good they are right now. So a group of 50 would be split up into smaller groups with a qualified coach working with those groups. And from there, players can move from group to group. And I know this seems outlandish in a cohorted COVID environment, but they get moved from group to group based on what that person and what that player actually needs at that point. They'll receive feedback as well as how their children's doing in those environments. So I want to dial that back. That's an internal club piece and how they are actually going to do that. So I'd encourage you to ask your club, what does a training environment look like? How is this going to work, et cetera, et cetera. Some clubs won't operate under those principles because they don't have to quite yet. But my job is to encourage them to actually operate like that. If we dial it back to what this translates to in terms of a league offering, in terms of these match days and the festivals, what this looks like is all of the U8s from club XYZ, all the U8 boys from club XYZ come and they show up to the match day hub. They'll be in groups before that, right? The club makes the groups, the coaches in the club make the groups. And then they'll have a schedule set out that, hey, this is where you start on this little 3v3, 4v4 field. And after you've done that, you'll rotate on to the next one. But we have club leads, we have club staff that are there looking at it going, okay, this group's really struggling right now. They're getting blown out 6-0 in this little game. The next group that they play looks like that'll be a tough game for them as well. Heads are hanging down a little bit. I'm gonna actually swap this group with this group and bring them over here. Or there's 2 players, they look like they're enjoying it today. That group looks like they're struggling a little bit. I'm actually gonna go move them over to there. And so we're allowing for the match day experience to be more flexible, to be more enjoyable, and to be more developmentally appropriate than we ever have before. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please speak up again. I'd love to hear back from you. And thank you for unmuting and asking the question. I'm looking through the chat and there isn't any more questions. So if there are, please hack them out at this point. And I will be patient. And if not, again, you can reach me. Typically, the best way is through email. Don't like to give out my personal phone number and personal cell number because I get an angry wife when when I field calls at 10 p.m. from parents or from staff or from clubs and such. So yeah, if there's none others, feel free to take off. Shoot me an email if you like.
Hey, Jordan,
like to, yeah, go on.
I'm sorry, I don't have the chat. I can't find the chat icon on mine. Okay. Can you just go over the open rosters? Like, as a coach and as a parent, how would a festival day look for me with an open roster? So
amazing question.
That I'm training with, twice a week or whatever, and then come Saturday I go to the festival. How does that day look for me?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start off by, we've got the resources built. We're ready to hit send, but we're waiting to have some certainty around what this looks like for the summer. But what I'll try to do is answer your question here. So you'd show up as a coach. You would probably have your normal group of 12 if you're in a club that isn't going to be operating under a skill center type principle. And I know that this is different language. I know that it's a foreign concept, but that's that group of players that you can chop and change and stuff. So what we're doing is we're giving you as a coach flexibility. You show up with your 12, divide them up into 2, and you've got 2 games to facilitate. And I use the word facilitate because it's the kids' game. And I think Pellegrini has a great quote around, during the week, it's 95% coach, 5% player, but come match day, it's 95% player, 5% coach. So facilitate the game with the kids, not for them, but with them. And you've got 2 groups then, if your club is like that, or potentially you've got an extra assistant or their staff or something like that. We're working through the headaches of that, and we're looking to have extra staff in order to help with that. But you'd show up again, 2 groups, they would play. Say group 1 was really, really struggling, and you had another group from your club over on field 2. You could say, you know what, let's just swap these 2 groups right now. Like this is tough. The next few opponents, really difficult. Boom, they can go over there. And I'll trade groups with the other coach. Yeah. Group 2 stays there. Group 3 comes back and becomes group 1, right? And then you keep going on with your day. not much changes other than the fact that players can move from field to field within their same club to find the appropriate match for them, to find the appropriate opponent, to find the appropriate group of teammates, rather than having a hard and fast roster or hard and fast team that says, great, you're a team, you always stick together, you always play together, you will move around together, and you will win some, you'll lose some, you'll get kicked, you'll score some goals, and then you'll go home, right? So all of those things can still happen, but we're trying to maximize field time. We're trying to encourage an appropriate match for the player. And really, your role as a coach is going to become one of get the lawn chair out a little bit and relax. You're not going to have game sheets to fill out. You're not going to have player cards to show a referee. It's going to be helping facilitate this game or this day with the players. So I hope that answers your question, Ben.
Hi, Jordan. This is Salvatore here.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing? And thank you for this. This has been, as a parent and, an 8-year-old son that plays football in this country. And this is great news. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us and be clear on the idea. So thank you for that.
No problem.
My question is on coaching then. Is there anything that's rolled out for the coaches? I mean, I know you just said they sit, but they'll be able to sit and relax and enjoy, what's happening in front of them. But as far as rolling out for the coaches, whether it's skills or how they go about, developing these kids, because I agree, touching the ball and smaller format is a better option. But I'm just curious to get some feedback on, are there any changes for the coaches going forward as well?
Yeah, so great question. What I'm preparing in terms of material is a quick screencast, right? So a quick video, 15 minutes. This is a rundown process. Show up, go to your field, bang, 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 bang. This is how the day will look and feel. The utopian version of what that would look like is actually getting the club staff, the club coaches together at one location, and us actually working through the headaches and feeling it and learning as we go before we actually go live. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that's going to happen this outdoor, just based on our current realities. But you'll have educational material in the form of written document, of a screencast, and the club staff as well will be an excellent resource to lean on, because they're all being informed of what's going on. They've had an opportunity to help build this as well and give loads of feedback. And I'm going to say they should be in the know, and I'm going to do my best efforts to make sure that club staff are up to speed, and that one of the requirements is to actually have club staff or club designated person at the actual event, helping to coordinate that open roster concept, helping to encourage appropriate coaching behaviors, and helping to provide some coach mentorship as well on the day for their club. And then the last piece as well is to deal with the parent questions that will come. And what I'm not doing is calling parents incompetent. What I'm saying is that sometimes we just don't know. And it's events like this, like tonight, in terms of discussion and in terms of presentation, that help to increase everyone's level of knowledge and comfort with what's going on. So does that answer your question? I hope it does. And if it doesn't, please feel free to ask follow-up.
Yeah, no, it does. And again, as this rolls out and we learn more, I'm sure we'll have a clear idea of the coaching side of things.
Yeah. What I can say is that typically actual learning is very messy. It doesn't look sterile and sanitized and clean and loads of cones and pass from here to here to here to here. Learning environments are quite messy. And I'm going to be the first to say and the first to admit that likely the first 1 or 2 times that we run this are going to be a bit messy. They're not going to be perfectly smooth. They're going to be a bit of a headache. They're going to be tough to get through. And I'll put my hand up and be the first to say that. But I think when we dial it back to what CMSA, what the clubs, what parents, what coaches all want, it's what's best for the kid. So if we make sure that we keep that at the center, I think that we can work through some of these difficult moments, these sticky parts, and this will be a phenomenal model for players to enjoy for many years after I'm out of this chair, and someone far more capable and competent replaces me. So I'm gonna give it about another minute or two, and if there's no other questions, I'm gonna stop recording, stop sharing the screen, and say once again, thank you so much for joining. Please reach out if you've got questions. More than happy to answer. If you can, when you reach out, include what club you're at, so I can include the club staff and club admins and such in the response, just to make sure that communication is clear and that we're all on the same page.
Hey, Jordan, quick question.
Yep.
What was the buy-in from the different clubs? Like, was there resistance to it, or was it mixed? Kind of, how did those conversations go? Obviously, this has taken a while to kind of come to fruition here. Yeah,
it's a good question. So I started this process last September, about the end of last September 2020, and through that we've had a couple of rounds of feedback from the clubs. If I was to give you a percentage in terms of positive feedback, I would go 75 to 85% positive, really positive. Questions, right? Like, need clarity, but positive responses in terms of this is a good direction, this is the appropriate direction to be going. And then 15 to 25% that had some questions around match format, around roster sizes, around concerns that some clubs will manipulate groupings of players, that sub clubs will engage in I'll call them antisocial behaviors at these events, that some clubs will use this essentially as a recruiting ground for their club. And my message to them has been simple and the same as tonight. It's about living local and playing local. And can you play at your local club that trains a walking distance away, that trains as close of a drive as possible for as long as possible? So club buy-in was actually quite positive. And I think some of the clubs have appreciated having someone with a technical background reorganizing this, because they can speak a similar language, that the priorities are the same, and that it's not me just sat behind a computer doing what I think is best. I think that they valued the time and effort that went into researching what best practice was, that went into consulting with over 27 experts in player development, experts, researchers, and academics to get to this point. I mean, we consulted with other sport organizations in terms of what are you doing that's working unbelievably well? What can we steal? What can we tweak? What can we tailor to fit into soccer? So I think that they've valued the process as well that we've gone through in terms of including their feedback and including their ideas and experiences as well in formulating this. And listen, if you know something different that I don't know, and they all talk behind my back and say that this is crap and that we shouldn't be doing this, well, hey, shoot me an email, because I'd love to hear that as well. So I hope that answers your question there.
Yeah, thanks for that.
No problem at all. No problem. You're welcome. Appreciate you asking the question. Okay. I see a lot of non-cameras on, mutes still on.